President, this has been a busy week, walking through a lot of issues that are COVID-19 related, a lot of individual meetings, committee meetings, be able to walk through what we can get done in preparation for the next step. Met with Francis Collins very early yesterday morning to be able to walk through where is vaccine development, what's happening on this current timeline with different treatment options. Very optimistic on some of the vaccine developments, multiple different lines of vaccines, and very hopeful we'll have a vaccine in place by this fall. That we could have hundreds of millions or at least tens of millions of different vaccines that would be ready, well over 100 million be ready by Christmas time, it looks like. So continue to be able to push in that direction. Had untold number of conversations with the Secretary of Treasury over the last 5 days, talking through the Paycheck Protection Program, trying to be able to settle this issue of forgiveness. This has been a very big issue with small businesses and not-for-profits in my state and quite frankly around the country. There is no closing information on how the Paycheck Protection Program ends. They were very grateful to have the help at the beginning, but it is set up to be a loan unless you qualify for it. And a lot of these folks took that loan that would then transition to a grant under the hope that everyone would be treated fairly. But the rules were not set in place. I spent a lot of time this weekend and through earlier this week with the Treasury Department. They released out finally today a very simple statement that if you're a truly very small business or not-for-profit, that is your total loan was $2 million or less, you will be in what they call safe harbor. They're not going to have to worry about audits. They're not going to have to worry about follow through at the end of it. It's going to be a very straightforward process for those very small businesses and small not-for-profits if that loan is $2 million or less. Now remember, that loan covers their total payroll for 2 months. And so that's a truly small entity. Once you get into larger entities, they may have a loan from $2 million to $10 million to cover their entire payroll expenses for 2 months. Those folks will have a good faith process that also was outlined. That was a very fair process to be able to come out today as well. That's helpful. And when I spoke to Secretary Mnuchin earlier today, thanked him for getting this done as we've worked through this process. I thought that was the most reasonable solution to provide the greatest clarity and simple paperwork for those very small businesses that don't have to worry about having to pull together a ton of documents for them. So for $2 million or less for the loan, they'll all be in safe harbor. Even have worked on some non-COVID related issues this week. Senator Rosen and I made contact with the ambassador from Ukraine to be able to talk about in one town in Ukraine, some law enforcement sent out a letter to every person in the town saying, if you're Jewish, we need you to register to make sure that we can deal with crime in our community. That's appalling. And so we contacted the ambassador for Ukraine and said, help us understand why there's leadership in one of your town that is trying to register every Jew in your town, saying that it's because of crime issues. They're immediately pulling that back, doing an investigation, and I'm grateful to the nation of Ukraine, which has been a very close ally and friend of the United States, especially in our pushing back against the aggressive Russia that is to their east, that Ukraine is continuing to be able to speak out immediately for the basic freedoms of individuals to be able to live their faith and not have to be registered by a local government. And looking forward to an explanation of that in the days ahead. But the vast majority of the things that I've worked on this week have been related to COVID-19 as we try to be able to walk through the issues of my state in Oklahoma reopening and multiple states around the nation slowly trying to be able to find ways to reopen, as we see other nations doing as well. Italy, who was exceptionally hard hit, is in the process of reopening right now. Germany, which was also very hard hit by COVID-19, is in the process of reopening. Spain, now fully half of Spain, is in phase 1 of reopening for them as well. South Korea, exceptionally hard hit, is not only reopening, they've already had an election and had record high turnout physically at the polls because they set up a social distancing process to be able to do in-person voting and had a record 65% turnout, the highest turnout that they've had in 28 years. They had in their first election post-COVID-19 outbreak in the country. So that's a very hopeful sign, not only that they are returning to life as we are, but they're also have worked out a process to be able to have voting and to be able to have safe voting processes. The White House has announced a tremendous increase in testing again. Last week, with 2 million COVID-19 tests that were done, and the target for May is to be able to do 13 million tests done just in the month of May. So it's been a dramatic increase as we're seeing a doubling of things here. There's now 79 different diagnostic tests that have been authorized. There's been 12 different serology tests that have been authorized. The FDA has granted 92 emergency use authorizations. So there's pretty fast work to be able to go through the process, knowing that this has only been a few months as they've gone through the process. And so far, a total of $11 billion has been provided to states and tribes to be able to offset the cost of testing for them. In fact, Oklahoma has received almost $88 million just to deal with the testing issues in our state as we continue to see a rapid acceleration. In fact, my state's on due to receive 90,000 swabs just this month to continue to be able to do the testing that's there. So we've seen a pretty dramatic increase of engagement on testing, and that's exceptionally helpful for us. For the Treasury, they've made a lot of progress on getting out the economic payments, those economic impact payments to people. They've now sent out 130 million of those. Just in my state, 1.5+ million of those economic impact payments have been made in my state, totaling about $2.8 billion. That's come in direct assistance to folks in the states. So in my state. So it's been significant help to people that need to get it. The Paycheck Protection Program continues to help the smallest of businesses. The economic impact payments have gone out, even as the state is starting to finally come back alive little by little as we've worked through phase 1 of reopening and now headed carefully towards a phase 2. I continue to encourage my fellow Oklahomans to keep social distancing, wear a mask, which I do in public, and to continue to be able to keep a good attention to your own hygiene and to taking care of people that have other health issues or people that have especially heart issues or diabetes issues. They know to be able to stay home and to keep themselves protected, and I encourage them to continue to do that. Now, while we're working through all of these things in the Senate and trying to find practical solutions and to try to work through things in a nonpartisan format, which is what we should do right now, trying to be able to take on COVID-19, I was rather shocked yesterday when the House of Representatives released the details of the bill that they hope to vote on Friday. This bill that they hope to vote on Friday is a $3 trillion bill. That is larger than the previous 4 bills that we have voted on combined. It is a pretty dramatic expansion of a lot of issues that are not COVID-19 related. As we said in the previous conversation just a month and a half ago, what we focus on right now should be COVID-19 related, not try to say it's a COVID-19 related bill and then stick a bunch of other stuff into it. It's over 1,800 pages. In fact, just the summary of it, if people want to see the summary document of it, is 90 pages long just to be able to get the summary of it. And it deals with a lot of issues that are certainly not COVID-19 related, and I think a lot of Oklahomans and a lot of other Americans would say, why did they want to stick that in there? And just think, look over here at this big number we're going to give to states, and look over here at this big issue, and don't pay attention to these other issues. For instance, I understand there's legitimate issues on trying to be able to protect voting and to make sure that the voting this year can go off safely and that can go off in a way that we can all have great credibility on. That's what South Korea just did with record high turnout with in-person voting. But that's not what this bill that's coming from the House plans to do this week. What they plan to vote on Friday radically changes voting for the entire country, not for this year, permanently. It prohibits states from here on out on imposing any conditions or requirements for eligibility for voting. It gives absentee ballots mailed to every single person. It also breaks down any voter ID laws that are in each state and authorizes something called ballot harvesting, which has been exceptionally successful in California for Democratic candidates. But it basically allows someone to come to your door and say, have you voted yet absentee? And if it's no, they can vote on the spot. The person at your door can then take the ballot from you and they'll say, I'll go turn it in for you. Well, obviously there's lots of moments of fraud for that, but this would make that mandatory nationwide. That's a major issue. to be able to change how we do voting forever and to be able to break this down. This is not the time to try to cram this into a bill that's supposedly about COVID-19 to do a permanent change on that. It also does some things that I was rather stunned by, even for some of my colleagues on the House side. It changes the economic impact payments, and it takes away the requirement that they have to have a Social Security number. Well, if you take away the requirement that it has to have a Social Security number, what it allows then is for people that are non-citizens to be able to get the economic impact payments, up to $6,000 per household for any individual that's in the country. Well, that's a pretty dramatic shift in what we're doing, and it allows people that are not legally present in the country to actually end up with economic impact payments as well. I don't think most people in my state would be someone that would agree with that and would want to know, why are we trying to be able to stick that in? It also does some pretty massive changes to how immigration is actually handled. It frees a lot of people that are currently under ICE custody right now and forces the release of those individuals. It awards federal funding specifically to sanctuary cities. It prevents the deportation of anyone who's not legally present in the United States. It provides deferred action and work authorization for anyone that's working in a job here, regardless of legal status, into the country. So it literally takes everyone who's not legally present here and gives them legal status during this time period. It changes the unemployment insurance in a way that's pretty dramatic. Currently, the unemployment insurance is greatly plussed up during this time period. There's an additional $600 per week per person for anyone on unemployment insurance. That allows an individual in my state to make about $48,000 a year on unemployment assistance. The challenge is there are many individuals that don't make $48,000 in their normal job, but they're making $48,000 now on unemployment assistance. This bill coming from the House changes that because that extra $600 per week expires at the end of July. It changes the expiration of that deep into next spring of 2021, regardless if your state is open for business or not. So in my state in Oklahoma, literally, it would encourage people that make less than $48,000 a year to not go back to work because they could make more by staying on unemployment insurance, not through just July, but all the way through the rest of this year and through half of next year. Regardless if your state is open or not, regardless if we have a vaccine or not. If we have a vaccine, let's say in November, as Francis Collins states, you would still get this unemployment protection to be able to make $48,000 a year past your vaccination deep into next year. I think that's a continual problem, and I think that's an issue. In the bill itself, it actually sets up a series of changes in our federal cannabis laws, which immediately I had a thought of, okay, how much information is in this bill about cannabis? Cannabis is actually mentioned in this bill 68 times. Now, I'm not sure why that's in a bill dealing with COVID-19, but it does dramatic changes in our federal cannabis laws. There's a section where it gives tax breaks to teachers and firefighters and law enforcement folks. Okay, that's great, but stuck right in the middle of that section is a tax break for billionaires, which I was shocked. It's an almost $100 billion tax break for the top 1%. And it's stuck right in the section, just kind of quietly in there, in the middle of the section for teachers, firefighters, and law enforcement. The student loan section was also interesting to me. It provides $10,000 of loan forgiveness to every single student around the country. I'm sure every student would be grateful to have that, and I'm sure every family would be grateful to have this. But it wasn't needs-based, it wasn't anything else. It was just $10,000 of blanket loan forgiveness for every single student across the entire country. Of course, there's no liability protection that's anywhere in it. In the Paycheck Protection Program that's been exceptionally important to a lot of small businesses wasn't increased. So some things that are really needed at this time are not even addressed to be able to help small businesses again, or to be able to help with liability protections, which so many businesses and educational institutions and nonprofits are asking the question, how do I reopen? What do I do, and how do I deal with the liability issues? That was not addressed at all. I have a lot of concerns about this bill, beginning with just the basics of why didn't they even try to negotiate with Republicans and Democrats? It was a straight Democrat bill in a time we desperately need to focus on not putting out a partisan thing and saying, look, we're trying to be able to help, but don't look at all these hundreds and hundreds of pages of things that are not related to COVID. Let's try to actually solve the problem that's in front of us. It's serious. And the issues that we face dealing with health and the individuals that are on the front lines right now at grocery stores and at healthcare facilities and hospitals and truckers and convenience stores and folks that are doing carry-out food, those folks are doing remarkable work, and they should be encouraged, not discouraged with a partisan bill that's coming out here that everyone knows is not going to go anywhere. Let's keep working together. What's happening in the Senate to try to be able to establish bipartisan agreements on things, we should continue to be able to do. But flying in to do a messaging bill with $3 trillion that changes voting in America and changes cannabis laws and does all kinds of other things is not what we need to do right now. Let's keep to work, though, because there is plenty that does need to be done. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.